Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. We just were up in Vancouver, BC for the International Cannabis Business Conference, or ICBC, where they had some really good panels, including international cannabis export and commerce. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
That's effectively what we're starting to see more and more are companies that are structuring their operations in manners which are tax efficient. And I would like to, I guess, put out to both of you the question as what is driving your respective businesses? Is it following Canada as an example, or is it other considerations such as tax efficiencies? I'm wondering if you might be able to comment. Let's start with Linus this time.
Well, basically, if you look at the history for Germany, in 1998 we had dronabinol, which is a purely THC compound, which was sort of given to patients. In 2003 we have flowers already from the Netherlands, so there has been already a market for it. However, in 2017 it became possible to reimburse medicinal cannabis by the health insurance of the people in Germany, and this was sort of the game changer. We're now ramping up. In the last 2.5 years it's only 70,000 patients, but this is due to the fact that we don't have the education of the doctors. So sort of copying on the one side from the medicinal space, yeah, basically as an experiment in Europe from everyone, so a little bit from Canada, in the United States, and so on and so forth. But in the end, we need more doctors' education, and this is something we should start copying more efficiently, sort of opening up the world of cannabis to our doctors in Germany to be able to sort of bring more patients in, because we have 70,000 patients, and I think the potential is between 800,000 and 1.6 million, because it's roughly 1 to 2% of the population of Germany.
Interesting. Andrew?
We track patient performance against lab-verified product, and in most jurisdictions you don't have even a testing requirement today. So the key to us understanding the science behind what works and what doesn't is to be able to identify which chemical constituents are correlated to what's symptomatic improvement, and drilling down by cohort, by age, by gender, and being able to see that 35-year-old women react to certain chemical profiles different than 50-year-old men, for example. So if we think about other jurisdictions where the US is a good example, every state is an island, every state has its own regulatory regime for how they, both how they grow as well as how they test. So for me, it's about taking the experiences from Canada with lab-verified products and the data that's related to those lab-verified products, and translating that into foreign markets where we haven't actually tested local product there, but we know that chemical profile aligns to personality. So even in Europe today, as we know, there's very little product there, so we have an opportunity right now to take what we know. And we've had the fortune to do that here in Canada only because the regulations are the way they are. So I think we actually, from my perspective, we had a great advantage here that the regs were so tight.
Interesting. Well, an avenue that you may not think about that certainly should come to mind in the discussion of international is certainly First Nations. Now, at the moment, as C-45, the Cannabis Act, stands, there is no information or guidance as to how First Nations should be setting up legal cannabis operations. We have to remember that First Nations are also technically a fourth level of government. And recently I was made a board member on the Zagame Assiniboine First Nations Cannabis Board, which you're starting to see First Nations understanding that through their own process of self-determination, provided they are then endorsed by band and band council, they then are able to create infrastructure such as a cannabis board on their land and begin to engage in this process. But I've always thought that that could go a step further. Depending on the band, again, depending on the nation, if it's a J Treaty band, and again, that goes back to the late 1850s or so, which was a recognition of, by the US, Canadian, and British governments of the First Nations that were in existence at that time. And the stipulation was to recognize the free movement of people and goods. And I think, well, what I know is coming is that you're going to see a lot more First Nations exercising their self-determination in some form or another to realize a tax efficiency. And I started looking at this like 6-7 years ago in my first legal aid case in Haida Gwaii. I was up there and they're talking about, getting into the wine trade, and I was like, have you seen the wind? It's 180 miles an hour. You're gonna be harvesting grapes in Prince Rupert. What about cannabis? Because ultimately I looked at it as Haida Gwaii could very much be the Bermuda or the Bahamas of British Columbia with respect to an onshore, offshore arbitrage. So that, I think we're going to see across the United States, First Nations engaging in self-determination, which could lead to international deals with the European market, and with certainly cross-border. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it couldn't happen soon enough. I mean, there's a massive opportunity in production and a massive opportunity in export once a level of compliance is reached. I think that's the big key right now is bringing production facilities on those lands up to the same level that are in. And that's not to say it can't be done. Of course it can be done. It's just, is it a priority right now? And it hasn't been up until now. But it will be, and there is a lot of opportunity for product to cross borders that don't have the same level of export regulation that, say, any of the big producers here today have.
Right on. Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's
from your European perspective on First Nations.
Exactly. I mean, we have from a European standpoint, and that's basically the word everybody heard of is the EU GMP certification process. Nick did it in his speech that there is like a huge effort to really reach that kind of certification. We are engaging in that, and I think there need to be clear standard ways of how to produce medicinal cannabis throughout the world, and this can only be done through collaboration. And I see that this really urge for collaboration in cannabis is there. I mean, my background is pharma. There wasn't like everybody was working in their little offices, and now with cannabis we have the possibility to really do that collaborative work in order to find really standards that would ease the export and ease also any processes in sort of bringing products either from Canada to other jurisdictions or also into Canada, I would say. I mean, domestic supply in Germany is not enough, but others will be ramping up, so there must be some kind of standardization in the process. Yeah, and that's what I think is the big challenge in the near future.
Well, given there's a lot of products going from A to B and C and D and back to A probably, how are the products getting to their destinations?
Go ahead. I'll give an anecdote. I mean, I have BC product that I bought that got delivered to me in Ontario, and I brought it back to BC. You know, products are getting transported in a lot of different ways, and I think there's there are both logistical issues, but there are regulatory issues. I don't even know how we're ever going to get into the U.S. in the near future, because it's very exclusionary, for lack of a better word. I think it's a short-term problem, but it is what it is right now, so I don't think the U.S. market is going to be. But how do we get products into the U.K.? We were just talking about this earlier, or into the EU. If you can get into the market, is it transported by air? Is it transported by ship? Is it transported by rail? And we know that they have a prevalence for rail, so I'm just a data guy, but I'm just speaking observationally on what I see.
So Linus, you get somehow this product comes from the Netherlands, makes its way to Germany. Do you want to take us through that?
Exactly, and we actually are using a normal transporters bringing in from Betrocan. Basically, everybody knows that they're doing standardized medicinal cannabis products out of the Netherlands. Those are the ones which we are currently distributing in Germany. We are in discussion with several Canadian companies already, but then this EU GMP certification comes in, where it sometimes gets really difficult, but we now have a GMP professional in our team who really helps the companies to sort of ease that process. But I must admit, of course, it's coming from Canada, it's always by plane. And we had the first plane arriving from Tilray in Germany last week from Portugal. So there are new countries coming in where we can build relationships also inside the European Union, which makes it a little bit easier. But I mean, there are products coming in and there are possibilities, and we are more than happy to help you understand what is needed to bring products to the German market / the European market. Because once it's in the European Union, it's way easier, of course, distributing it to other countries, such as, for example, Spain, Italy, Portugal also, but Portugal has a huge domestic growth. I don't think there is export needed to Portugal.
So can I ask a question? To get it into the EU, is the same regardless of whether or not it's the end is going into Germany or going into Switzerland or?
Yeah, it's not as easy as that. So of course, once you're inside the European Union, it is easier to have the export license as a European company to export to a different jurisdiction within the European Union. That's what's easier because it's already checked by a qualified person, which is also in our team, and then it's also medical approved in Germany, which makes it easier to distribute to any other. The other way around, it's a bit more difficult because the Germans always looking very deeply into the processes and check if everything is all right. But the other way around, it's more easy. Yeah.
So if you're Canadian, you'd look for the easiest jurisdiction in the EU to get into, and then from there you transfer it into Germany.
It's the
biggest market. So I want to engage the audience. Just indulge me for 1 second. You've been a great audience here. With a yay or a nay, I'd like an honest answer. We'll see who's louder, I guess. Canada, cannabis regulations, are they over-regulated? Yes! Nay or yay? Yay! Okay, good. So we can continue, because if it went the other way, I don't think I could have asked the next question. Given that Canada had first mover advantage and has created a system that the rest of the world has been watching, some have even been adopting and applying, but do you feel that the standard in Canada has set itself too high that it'll be very hard for the government to come down to be competitive? So I guess the question is, has Canada, in a way, by being so cautious out of the gate, has it kneecapped itself with respect to being truly competitive?
I think it's actually been a boon for us because by setting the regulations so high, it's forced us to come to the table with real pharmaceutical type production facilities and really high quality product that no other jurisdiction would accept if we weren't at that phase. So I kind of look at it the other way. If we were like the US, where the lens is really about commercialization and not about public safety, I don't think a country like Germany would even consider bringing it in without the type of testing and experience level that we've had over this. And remember, we started out. The only reason why we're able to have that jump start into the European Union, as an example, is because we had a medical program. It has nothing to do with the recreational program. And the only reason we're able to go into foreign markets today is because of the medical program. So I don't think having tight regs around the recreational program is going to be a limitation. And I also think that it's way easier for the government in Canada to loosen the reins than it is for instance, in the US.
Well, that's if they get voted back in.
That's
if they get voted back in.
Yeah, I mean, from a German perspective, I think I can't tell if Canada is overregulated my first time here, but basically what we see is a German would always do something rather not than doing it wrong, and that's why they're very cautious and careful by sort of importing products into Germany, and nobody knows really how to do it right. Every local authority needs to do that import license for the respective producer base or respective distributors, and this is also based on the place where you're located in Germany. For example, I'm from Hessen, Frankfurt, and we have 3 authorities which are sort of overlooking the whole process. We have a narcotic agency who then in the end decides what is done. So we have, of course, huge regulations as well, but it's sort of the processes are getting easier because they've been done a couple of times now. Yeah, as I said, we are more than happy to assist. I think, as Nick said earlier, you should always go with a good GMP consultant in order to be able to sort of overlook what is needed before you end up having huge costs and will not be able to bring products in.
Hey, before we go to questions, is there anything in particular that we haven't covered that either of you'd like to share about the uniqueness of being ahead of the curve, if you will, with your business? And be happy to learn more about this.
We were fortunate to be gathering data in 2016, so we had a pretty big head start in doing it. Now, we still have to deal with, as we go into international markets, we still have to deal with jurisdictional transfer of data across borders. So going to Europe, for example, we have to be GDPR compliant, which is the privacy regulation in that market. And if you will, in the US, there's HIPAA compliance, that's if we consider right here. Canadian compliance is PIPEDA, and it's basically level compliance is here, and GDPR is way up here. So it's a big step up, and for us, having a first mover advantage of gathering data and being cloud-based and only keeping data only residing in Canada, never leaving the country on servers here. As we go into the UK or into Germany or anywhere in the EU, we have to be GDPR compliant, and we are now. So or almost are now.
Interesting. Right on. Okay, Linus, your thoughts.
I think data is a big point, and that's where the game is changing. And that's
I hope you're right.
And when Israel also coming in, I think we had it already earlier in the conference where somebody was talking about Israel, how much data they're gathering, they're doing it for 20 years. I think this is really something what is important and needed, and I said it already in the beginning, collaboration is the key. I would say combining different jurisdictions, see what works. Do experiments. I mean, Germany is the experiment for Europe in terms of the patient numbers and sort of inserting products from all over the world. So yeah, I see data is key, and we should be exchanging more of the data. And yeah, I'm looking forward maybe working more closely with you in the future.
Okay, yes or no answer to this question, and then we'll open it up to questions. The cannabis production, yes or no? Is it a race to the bottom?
Putting me on the spot with that.
He's got an answer too.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, the reality is it is right now. I think it'll stabilize at some point, but you know, at this point, every producer can sell everything that they grow. There's just so much demand. At some point, there'll be enough supply to service the market, and I don't know when that is, but at some point there'll be enough supply to service the market, and companies are going to have to figure out how to differentiate their products from others. And it's a very hard market. I'm an IP lawyer, so it's very difficult to actually protect a particular cultivar, because somebody could just come up with a formulation that's slightly different and it's no longer covered.
Sir, the same question. Yes or no?
Just for an example, for Germany, in 2018 we had 3.1 tons of cannabis flower material, which was distributed. This year we are probably at 5 to 6. Next year it's going to be again doubled, let's say 12 tons for whole of Germany. And if I just see what amounts are currently grown, there will be a huge, and I'm not afraid, but it will be a huge challenge to sort of differentiate the different products. But let's look at Greece, where there are 100 tons grown, another Spain coming in, Portugal, Canada is there. Nobody knows what's going to happen with the US in short notice. Yeah, it's going to be a huge challenge in terms also of the pricing and competitiveness, because there are also Eastern European countries coming in, North Macedonia, Poland, which are produced at really, really low cost. So let's see how it turns out. I don't have a answer to that question, but yeah.
Those are yes and no answers, right?
German yes and no. It's very technical. Okay, are there any folks who...
Let's hear it for the panel, first of all, right away. I have a quick question first. You mentioned IP as in respect to cannabis strains. How is it even possible? How do you patent Trainwreck? How do you patent Bubba Kush? How do you patent Blue Dream? Like, I mean, cannabis strains have been open source for the longest time, and it's just it's weird to me to see people try to.
If anybody's ever done a patent before, you know, there's a long process to it. It's years, and it costs a lot of money. And not everybody can afford to patent a strain. And if you were to take a particular, if you went through the effort to genetically test your product, and that means beyond just, you know, CBD and THC, but if you actually go through the effort and look at the full chemical profile, and you patent that, that's great. You're going to spend $15,000, $25,000 on that. It'll take a couple years, and then somebody's going to change the formulation by one slight different amount, and then you're no longer covered. So I don't think it's patentable.
Hi. I heard you guys talking. What about the Caribbean market? Because I know a lot of you guys are in the Caribbean right now, but I hear you mention nothing about the Caribbean market.
Well, I also think the Antarctica market has potential, but we can't discuss everything. To answer your question,
So
I think that's a huge market, and unfortunately, none of us are technically working in that jurisdiction.
Well,
And
I
so-
know there are a lot of guys in the region right now.
Oh, I have a number of people in this room I know who are working in Jamaica right now, but I've never
Exactly.
been there. But I will say this, is that the Caribbean has a huge role to play in the cannabis industry because it will allow a lot of companies to do what's called, they'll be eligible for something called a Citizens Investment Bureau Passport Program, meaning that if you show up in Antigua, Barbuda and say, hi, government, I'd like to give you our IP. I'd also like to talk to you about a distribution agreement, and in return, we're now eligible for your Citizens Investment Bureau Passport Scheme. What is that? I was happy, but the point I'm trying to make is yes, you're going to see a lot of places that use the Caribbean for cannabis, just like they're going to use the Caribbean for banking services, which means it's going to be a very central hub, either way.
Thank you. All right, over here.
You're welcome.
I had a question about strategic partnerships. So you kind of mentioned the tribes. I had submitted a tribal tokenized asset in California, with the collateral being a blunt rolling machine with the idea of combining tobacco and cannabis. They didn't like the idea, maybe it was too soon. And so I'm curious about your opinions in utilizing Native American tribes in North America and combining cannabis with tobacco. So in the eventuality that's normalized, professionalized, do you guys see that as being an option? I know that Germany's probably never going to allow that, but it's popular with spliffs. But do you guys see blunts, tobacco and cannabis eventually being combined together?
There's a massive tobacco production facility on Six Nations in Hamilton, outside of Toronto. And if you've ever been there, it's one of the largest tobacco production facilities in the world. And I don't think there's much interest in combining tobacco and cannabis in a product, but there is definitely interest in utilizing their infrastructure to produce cannabis to be exported.
And yes, tobacco, at least in the Supreme Court cases with First Nations, have recognized a very general right to the possession of tobacco for commercial purposes. I forget, Vanderpeet, I think, was a Supreme Court case where a guy had been stockpiling tobacco. Clearly he was going to sell it, but that was something that First Nations, we have to remember, were doing since time immemorial before Europeans showing up. So that type of a scenario fit very nicely within the existing jurisprudence, and that's why I think cannabis isn't really too big of a stone's throw from tobacco. And in fact, it's just one of many natural medicines. And from the work that we've been doing, more of the bands are wanting to not just take on cannabis, but they want psilocybin, the fungi, peyote through the cacti, vines, ayahuasca, DMT with chacruna, all of these natural practices that I think they will be able to do a whole host of commercial endeavors under food, social, and ceremonial. But thank you for your question.
Yeah, and how it's currently done in Germany, there's no possibility because no cannabis patient is smoking cannabis in Germany. No. Basically what we have is vaporizing option or tea option. Those are the things which are actively known as application methods, and this is a huge problem most of the doctors have, because if they're giving medicinal cannabis flowers to a patient, they always have the risk that they are smoking it giving to their grandchildren or something like that. So there's no option. But from a scientific point of view, I think there is it might be a possibility to use also the tobacco plant to find solutions of, for example, also creating cannabinoids. But that's a very interesting talk we should do maybe afterwards.
Yeah.
Hello.
Questions?
My name is Bill Hardy, Director of Sales with Craft Depot, and we're currently contracted by 50 LPs to help with wholesale distribution and creating efficiencies and transparency in that market, LP to LP. My question is specifically for Linus, and it's concerning importing into Germany or importing into the EU. I've heard variants of what's acceptable and what's not from a GPP standpoint. So if you have a cultivator who's GPP compliant and is doing their post-harvest in a GPP level, can they go into the EU GMP? Because I've understood that there's GACP, and then once they harvest, it has to go into a GMP process. So I'm trying to get some clarity because I hear people saying it was GPP all the way until it's packaged in kilos, it can move overseas. And I've heard folks that say, no, it has to be GACP at harvest, you cut her down, move it into GMP for your curing, drying, and packaging, and then that can move into the EU. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are a lot of things, a lot of rumors coming around. GACP, is it possible or not? Currently, there is no GACP grown product in the German market. So what you need is an EU GMP certified facility. The best would be by a German authority. Currently, waiting times are a year, 12 months, at least at our authority where we're working with. Then you're safe and can sort of distribute also pre-packaged medicinal cannabis products. And then all the qualification and the medical approval will be done inside Germany. The products will be then get an additional label on it, and you can distribute them in Germany. That's the easiest way. There are now things discussed if it's possible to sort of grow GACP certified products, have them extracted at an EU GMP certified facility, packaged, labeled, and then sent to Germany, but it's not yet possible. But this is, I think, a feasible solution because GACP is easier, and I don't think everything needs to be grown indoors. Greenhouses is an alternative, which is also used in Israel, for example.
Gotcha, thank you very much. So then, just for further clarification as well, a GPP cultivator, just with the cultivation license, who then sells to an EU GMP certified processor, who then creates those products and then they can export. Is that a possibility? Is that a supply chain that works?
As I said, every process, every supply chain is tested itself. So for example, if we are now coming together and you give me an overview of the products you would like to import, I have to get that import license based on those products. Exactly on all the information, all the lab tests you have. What we do is we usually do a sample shipment, have it tested in Germany and directly burned, basically, disposed. And then we sort of test all the processes because German authorities feel way more comfortable if they're tested by a German lab and have been tested by a qualified person. So it always suggests use a distributor where you have GMP knowledge and who have already done those sample shipments and understand the process. There are a lot of people running around. Currently there are 13 licensed distributors, including us. So be careful who you talk to.
Good question. Thank you. Perfect, thank you. Do we have time for one more, or is that it?
If someone has a brief one, anyone have a short question? Is that you raising your hand over there? All right, here we go.
Better be good.
One last quick question. Please be brief, do not ramble. Right here, here we go.
Just a question about Germany and what Afria is doing. So Afria has a distribution license, one of the 14 in Germany that you spoke of. And from my understanding, Afria is just purchasing products from Switzerland and getting distribution revenue for it from a company called Blossom. And basically they're just getting those companies and flipping them for pennies on the dollar. My question is, like, what do you think about that strategy for companies like Afria and yourself long term who are basically using the distribution network to create revenue?
So basically what we've set up, I mean, we are solely focused on distribution at the moment. We're doing some scientific work as well with the tobacco, for example. Where we see ourselves as an entry gate for Europe. We of course can distribute to the pharmacies. We are very well connected to the biggest pharmacies in the cannabis space. We are the only distributor who is part of the network of cannabis pharmacies in Germany. We think we have a good overview of the market and sort of know how it's working out. Currently, the process is not that much regulated that something like this can happen. So exporting, for example, from Switzerland, those are mainly, I think, also CBD products which are sold in Germany as aroma oils, and it clearly has to say that it's not. It should not be taken orally at any time. So what they're currently doing for those aroma oils and CBD is they put it on a pillow and then smell it through the pillow. That's how it's currently. The application method should be. Of course, you can easily take those products. But I mean, we have huge problems with the novel food. That's a completely different story. So I think it will be too much to answer that question, but I'm more than happy to talk afterwards. Yeah.
Aroma oil, you said it.
Yeah, aroma.
All right. Thank you so very much. Let's hear it once again for the panel.
And with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.